Well, hello everybody. Today we're going to be discussing the brain. So get out your notebook and write this down on the input side of your notebook. Your essential question for today's notes is for you to list and describe 3 functions of cerebral spinal fluid. And here you can see a picture of the flow of cerebral spinal fluid as it goes around your brain and spinal cord. All right, so the brain and cranial nerves. Your brain, this is a photo of an actual human brain as it has been dissected from a human cadaver, somebody who has donated their body to science, or maybe from an autopsy. You can see here this photo showing the major parts: the cerebrum, the thalamus, hypothalamus, the midbrain, the brain stem, with the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord down here. And this is the cerebellum. Those are the main parts of the brain that we're going to talk about. Oh my, let's look at this. Okay, your brain is the largest organ in the body. It has a mass of almost 3 pounds, and it functions in sensations, memory, emotions, decision making, and behavior. Okay, as mentioned, the principal parts of the brain are the cerebrum, which has 2 lobes, the diencephalon, which includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, and the pineal gland, your cerebellum, the brain stem, which has the medulla, pons, and midbrain, and you can see all of those listed here and labeled where they are at on the human brain. The protective coverings of the brain include bone. You have a skull that completely encases your brain. There are meninges, which are membranes and fluids. Your meninges are the same as around your spinal cord, which include your dura mater, your arachnoid mater, and your pia mater. There are dura mater extensions, which include the falx cerebri, the tentorium cerebelli, and the falx cerebelli. Blood supply to the brain. Arterial blood supply, arterial, which would be arteries, includes branches from the circle of Willis on the base of your brain. Vessels on the surface of your brain, they will penetrate tissue, and your brain uses 20% of your body's oxygen and glucose, which gives us blood flow to an area that increases with activity in that area. Anytime your brain is deprived of oxygen for 4 minutes, it does permanent injury to the brain tissue. Our brains do have a blood-brain barrier, which protects your cells from toxins and pathogens, and proteins and antibiotics cannot pass through the blood-brain barrier, but smaller chemicals such as alcohol and anesthetics can. Tight junctions seal together your epithelial cells around your brain in a continuous basement membrane. Astrocyte processes that cover the capillaries. So, if there's a blood-brain barrier, blood cannot get into your brain. How does your brain get nourished with all the fluids and stuff like that? Well, that happens because of the cerebral spinal fluid. This is a fluid that has a volume between 80 and 150 milliliters, so it's really not very much. 3 to 5 ounces of fluid that surrounds your brain and your spinal cord, so cerebrospinal fluid. It's a clear liquid that contains glucose, which is the sugar your brain cells need to function, proteins for all of those chemical exchanges, and ions. Okay, here are the functions for cerebrospinal fluid. Functions as for mechanical protection, so it floats the brain. Your brain is floating in this fluid, which means it'll soften impact with the bony walls. So anytime you take a hit to the head or something like that, there is some cushion in there because of that fluid that's in there. Also, another function of the cerebrospinal fluid is a chemical protection. It provides optimal ionic concentrations for action potentials. Remember, we need those action potentials to function very, very quickly and efficiently. So the cerebrospinal fluid provides a really good concentration for action potentials to flow around and through your brain. And also circulation for the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid doesn't just sit there, it moves around the brain and has a certain flow pattern, which allows the brain to receive nutrients, to remove waste products into and out of the bloodstream. Reabsorption of cerebrospinal fluid does happen. You can see this here in the frontal plane of the brain. This is where we have a sinus, which is just, it's a cavity inside the skull. That's where a sinus is. And how this works is the cerebrospinal fluid is reabsorbed through the arachnoid villi, which are these little finger-like projections that enable the brain to reabsorb it. And these look like grape-like clusters, and they penetrate through the sinus, which was mentioned before, and about 20 milliliters per hour is the reabsorption rate. So it's about the same as the production rate of the cerebrospinal fluid. This is a disorder, hydrocephalus. This is a disorder whenever a child is born with too much fluid on his or her brain. You can see the enlargement of their skull. The poor little baby here has an enlarged skull because there's too much fluid on the brain. And if it's left for a long period of time without draining it, so you can see the scope that's gone down here to drain this, the child can have severe brain damage. Hydrocephalus could be caused by what it is. It's a blockage of drainage of the cerebrospinal fluid, like it was mentioned with those sinuses and stuff like this, which could be because of a tumor, cancerous cells that have built up over time, swelling on the brain, developmental malformation, which happens usually with babies, meningitis, the swelling of the meninges, or a hemorrhage or injury of the brain can also cause this disorder. It's a continued production of cerebrospinal fluid causes an increase in pressure. When there's too much fluid there is an increase in pressure. This often happens in newborns or a fetus. The fontanelles allow this internal pressure to cause the expansion of the skull. Fontanelles are the spaces between the bones of the skull. And there can be damage to the brain tissue for newborn babies. Neurosurgeon implants a drain that shunts the cerebrospinal fluid to the veins of the neck or the abdomen. So what happens is whenever a baby is born like this, a neurosurgeon will go in and place this drainage tube so that this will drain down through the veins, the blood vessels of the neck or the abdomen. And it's important that it's the veins because those veins can accommodate that extra fluid and push it through the rest of the body, so it's not stuck in the child's head. All right, well, this concludes the notes for today. Make sure you go back and answer that essential question and finish setting up your Cornell notes. All right, have fun with this, and I'll see you in class.